hope in these challenging and difficult times. And that's what the Institute for Change Leaders really specializes in, is that hope. Moving that hope and using a unique training formula they have to move that hope into tangible, sustainable, transformative change moving forward, and being able to showcase that with our recipient and all of the friends and allies that are here today. So moving forward with our program, we're certainly going to hear from people to make remarks about what this award is about, to celebrate our recipient, and then we're going to do some celebration, some singing, and we'll hear some drumming, and of course, hear from our recipient herself, and then conclude within the next half hour or so and enjoy some fellowship time to socialize here together. So I'd like to call upon, as we go forward this afternoon, Chief Bob Chamberlain from KN First Nation in the lands that are also called British Columbia. Bob, over to you.
Gillikas Lahama Sulu Klatse, Nugwa Kalaga me Gaisanaka Quequasutinu Kwatmis, Muskamau Zaudino. My traditional name is Galagame, and I'm from the Quequasutinu Kwatmis First Nation, part of the Muskamau Zaudino peoples. I was very excited and very happy to be asked to be a part of the Institute for Change Leadership, to be play a role with brothers and sisters that are part of the board, to look for, identify some amazing candidates for the Layton Indigenous Leadership Award. And it is such an honor to be here. And what I'd like to do is share a prayer song that I learned. I like to say I learned it back in the 1900s, but it's one that speaks of reaching for spiritual help. It's one that speaks of getting that help to provide a better future for our children. And I think that is certainly in line with Jack's legacy, the vision and leadership he demonstrated to all Canadians.
Listen, Maggie fly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Chamberlain, and thank you for helping us center and to get our spirits ready to receive today's message and today's hope. And I'd like to now ask Kevin Wazijijiak from the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto to please come and say some words and extend a welcome. Thank you very much.
Iwach, ani panang Dijnakas, Upam Donjaba. I'm glad and honored to host everyone here. My English name is Kevin Wasagijic. I'm from Wikpampung and Cedar Territory. Now with working here at the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto. So on behalf of all of our staff, our board, our team here, the community that makes up our Native Canadian Centre of Toronto, it's certainly an honor to be hosting this inaugural award. Certainly to honor the individual that's being recognized, but also to Mr. Leighton's family, Mr. Leighton for his never-ending support and advocacy and understanding for what the Indigenous communities, Indigenous people have been striving for. So it's certainly an honor to play a small part to repay that partnership. So, Chimiwach, look forward to a good afternoon.
Midwich, Marseille, Kevin, and given that this is the first ever, the inaugural Jack Layton Indigenous Leadership Award, we have some other people in the room that we would like to introduce, of course, starting with a woman who needs no introduction at all, Ms. Olivia Chow. Councillor Mike Leighton is with us as well. Sarah Cunningham as well. She's with the Women's Advocacy Council for the Women's and Children's Shelter of Barrie. And Josh Bizjak is joining us via Zoom from Ottawa. Josh is the Executive Director of the Douglas Caldwell Leighton Foundation. Josh, nice to see you. Over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Mike. I really appreciate that. I'd like to say good afternoon to everybody there in Toronto. I wish I could have been there with you in person, but I am happy to be here none the same from my home in Ottawa. As the Executive Director of the Douglas Coldwell Leighton Foundation, I bring greetings and congratulations on behalf of our Board of Directors and all of our members from across Canada. The Douglas Coldwell Foundation is proud to be the home of the Leighton Legacy Project and the awards that bear Jack's name. This charity was founded 50 years ago by Tommy Douglas to help educate people about the leaders in this country who have helped propel us forward and celebrate our shared victories, which is exactly what we're doing here today. The Douglas Coldwell Leighton Foundation promotes the principles of social democracy while reclaiming the legacies of its founders and other social democratic thinkers, writers, and leaders. We contribute to public policy dialogue to provoke discussion through research, education, and by convening important conversations in Canada now and to support future generations. I encourage everyone here today to visit the charitable home of Tommy Douglas and our friend Jack Leighton to see how you can get involved. Today, we celebrate the work and accomplishments of this year's inaugural winner, Ellen Blais. So congratulations to you, Ellen, on being the very first Layton Indigenous Leadership Award recipient. I'm proud the Layton Indigenous Leadership Award will be presented annually to a leader who exemplifies the values that Jack held so dear. It's now my pleasure to introduce a beautiful video on behalf of our friend Jack Leighton, speaking from the House of Commons on the importance of true reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Jack's words are as true today as they were when he spoke them many years ago. So let's listen together.
Reconciliation also means that as a parliament and as a country, we must take action to address the terrible inequality faced by First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. We can start by restoring the nation-to-nation relationship between the Government of Canada, First Nations, Métis, and the Inuit. Thousands of Aboriginal children are without proper schools or clean water, adequate food, their own bed, good health care, safety, comfort, land, and rights. We can no longer throw up our hands and say there's nothing we can do. Taking responsibility and working towards reconciliation means saying we must act together to resolve this. Let us all, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Canadians who've been here for generations, and new Canadians, build a fair, an equal, and a respectful Canada for all. Miigwech, Ngosi, Nakami.
The stage is muted there.
And through acknowledging the work of our recipients and our honorable mentions. I remember when we finally began to find the mass graves of Indigenous children last year. And I'm sure we all remembered where we were when the news began to break. I remembered Jack's speech. It came to mind in Parliament following the Harper government's apology. I don't remember any action following the apology, but I certainly remember Jack's words, both reflective and prophetic, that we've just heard now to set the tone for moving forward to celebrate. Someone who's also been a tireless advocate for the rights and interests of Indigenous peoples is Member of Parliament Charlie Angus. Charlie Angus is joining us now on Zoom. Charlie, are you with us?
I am very with you, very with everyone today, and just honored to be here as we celebrate. Hello, I'm very honored to be here as we celebrate a future leader and talk about the connection with Jack's legacy. I'm in Ottawa today, heading into Parliament, and the only reason that I wear a suit and tie today is because I met Jack Leighton, and he said to me, "You can do this. You can be the change maker," something I had never thought that I would go into politics. And from the beginning, my relationship with Jack was rooted in the fight for justice with Indigenous people. I met Jack and Olivia while we were fighting to protect the Algonquin lands in Northern Ontario from toxic waste dumps and from poisoning the water. And Jack, from the beginning, showed us that he was a different kind of politician. He wasn't afraid to get in and mix things up. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. He wasn't afraid to try things that might not work if it meant that we were moving forward and building people up. The other thing that struck me with Jack from the get-go was his belief that people had the power to make change. And he was always encouraging people to be leaders, to be confident, to speak up. And certainly, I remember Jack with our work with the young Cree leader, Shannon Coustache, whose picture is behind me, and I keep her picture close. That fight that those youth from James Bay took became the largest youth-driven children's rights movement in Canadian history. And when they came to Ottawa in 2008, they were facing down against a militant government that wasn't going to respect Indigenous youth rights. Jack was the only leader who went out to meet with them and shake their hands, to talk to them, to encourage them. And Jack, of course, played that huge role in getting the apology in the House of Commons, because it's the other thing that Jack showed me about leadership. We can sometimes take really clear and definitive and hard lines, but the leader is also the one who can negotiate. And that Jack could negotiate with a hard ass like Stephen Harper and say, "You got to do the right thing. You got to pick up Canada's game here." That moment in the House from Jack's speech in 2008 was one of the most powerful things I'd ever seen. And it was because that's what leadership is. So Jack would want us to be encouraging this next generation of Indigenous leaders. That is his legacy, and he wants that dream to go forward. So I'm very, very honored to be here, and thank you all for participating.
Thank you, Charlie Angus, especially for all your work and advocacy with people out of Wachus, for Shannon's Dream as well. We mentioned when we started here this afternoon that this was going to be a celebration. And I'd like to call upon to start a celebration, to keep it continuing, Councillor Mike Leighton to come and say a few words. Please, Mike.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mike, and to everyone here and online for participating today. I just want to say two things really quickly, and my mom's kind of putting me on the spot here because I wasn't on the list to speak. But I want to say to Callie, you can't say no to Olivia, whether or not you work for her, or you work with her, or you're a family member. So really, no one can say no. I think that this award would bring, and the recipient would bring joy to Jack's heart for two major reasons. One is the speech you saw up there of Jack giving in the House of Commons, and I know we're at a time where there's a lot of apathy towards politicians, and you kind of think, well, what do they really care? It wasn't just in the House of Commons that Jack made a speech like that. This was the story of why he was dedicated to action on Indigenous issues ran very deep in Jack's veins. And it's because, and I believe it's because, there's a little bit of guilt that gets carried when you're the descendant of three fathers of Confederation, right? There's action that needs to be taken. And there was a story that he actually told me, we have a recording of it, just before he passed away, of his family's arrival in Canada. And the funny thing is, I was listening to that recording not long ago, and I was listening to a recording that he made of his grandfather at about the same time in the point of his life where he was going to pass away. He took a recorder to his father and told almost the exact same story of a family coming up to Canada on a very cold winter, arriving here with nothing, and facing almost certain death because of the elements. But a family that was embraced by the Mi'kmaq in New Brunswick, and were shown a way of survival. And then in that same story, he talks about children being taken from their parents, and about the residential school system, and how we have a debt that needs to be repaid. And I think that comes out a lot. It comes out a lot more raw in the recording I have, but it comes across in that video. But he lives by those values, or lived by those values, and he passed that along. And that's the second point I want to get to. Not a day goes by where someone doesn't say, you know, I knew your dad. I knew your dad. And people I think are a little embarrassed to say that to me these days, but my reply is always, what issue did you work on together? Because it's almost always that they were somewhere in a trench, they were somewhere in a committee room, they were in the basement of a church or a community center, hatching out a plan to try to make positive change happen. And sure enough, I don't think there's one person that hasn't actually named the issue they worked on and what they accomplished. Whether or not it was a win or something they didn't quite finish didn't matter. It was that effort was made, that organizing, that activist spirit was there. And that's the second reason why I think Jack would be so proud of this award being given out. It would be meaningful to his heart, but also the toughness that he showed in his life to fight for change. So thank you all very much for coming today. Thank you to all the applicants and the people that nominated those applicants. Please continue to do that because we should recognize leadership. We should celebrate that leadership as well because far too often we forget that a part of this fight is our enjoyment of each other and our love for one another. So thank you again, everyone.
You're so right. When I walked in, Riley, one of the person that comes in here a lot, said, I know Jack. I used to see him at St. Lawrence Market all the time, you know. It's like, now I haven't ventured out for a long time because of COVID, so I don't get out much, and usually you wear a mask, no one recognize you, but you're right. It's always someone recognized or have worked with Jack. And Jack would come home talking about when he go and visit from a reserve or somewhere. He would give graphic description with tears in his eyes, saying the injustice of it, the suffering, it's unbelievable. How could people sleep in shifts? How could anyone have such small space? This is not fair. This is boiling water. No, cannot do this. So he took the anguish and the anger and directed it to Stephen Harper. Except he wasn't angry with Stephen Harper. He kept it inside and he was just persistent. Every time he met with Stephen Harper, he would say, are you apologizing yet? When are you organizing it? Every single time. And he said, oh, I'm meeting with Stephen Harper again. Okay, I'm going to remind him one more time. It was just persistent over and over again. It doesn't matter whether it was a reception, whether it was on the campaign trail, in the House of Commons, it doesn't matter. He was at it. And when the apology was given on that day, normally in the House of Commons, those of you that visited, the visitors will sit up on the upper area. And the members of parliament would be sitting down here with the speaker, right? The government on one side, opposition on the other side. And of course, a lot of elders and chiefs, people from the Indigenous community were invited to come. And Jack said, no, they should not be sitting up in the gallery. They should be sitting on the floor. That's right, on the floor in the House of Commons, nation to nation. They belong here. They should be part of this space. Like, okay. And he insisted, we're not coming in. Okay, this looks really bad when you have a formal apology and then the chunk of the New Democratic Party of Canada not showing up, right? So just negotiate persistent. One last story I want to leave with you is that a story that Jack has repeated hundreds of times, to the extent that some of his handlers said, Jack, would you please, we've heard this many times. We were in Haida Gwaii, kayaking. We were going to go to Gwaihana, except there was a strike going on in Parks Canada, so we're not going there. So in Haida Gwaii, we were kayaking and we were also hiking. And those of you that know Oak Grove Forest, beautiful trees, majestic. And of course, there are ravens and eagles. And there was this one eagle that came and was circling, and we were hiking, and Jack was watching. And I don't know whether Jack embellished or whatever it was, he saw this eagle feather on the ground. And I said, well, you're not supposed to pick that up. Well, the eagle gave it to me. It came down. I thought, anyway, this was the feather that reminded him for the longest time. He would just be reminded right at his office saying that this is what it's all about. Justice. If I'm a leader, I'm going to make sure that justice and reconciliation is done. And that was his mission. And when he was buried, the FN chief at that time, Sean Atleo, gave a feather to the family. It was really beautiful. And the feathers are guiding us for not just for Jack and for many generations to come. I just want to thank Bob, Charlie, Angus, whose idea it is for this award, Sarah, Mike, Bob, and others that was on the judge panel and helped to put this event together. Thank you so much for your assistance. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Mike, especially for personalizing and sharing stories of the namesake of this award, which is so appropriate and so heartwarming to hear and so inspiring. So thank you both for that. We mentioned that we're at a celebration today, and at ICL, we like to celebrate people, and we like to celebrate action, we like to celebrate wins, and we have that here today. And so we're going to talk about whose work is up for honorable mention. It was a very difficult decision. Olivia just mentioned that there was a panel of esteemed judges for the recipients today. I was fortunate enough to be on that panel too. And Olivia, would you like to come up and say? Is Bob's going to do it? Okay, fair enough. Bob, would you like to introduce some of our honorable mentions for the first ever Jack Layton Indigenous Leadership Award?
Absolutely. It was a great honor to be a part of the committee that received the names to be considered, to have us all work together and arrive at a consensus decision, which I thought was very reflective of our party. I would like to identify that there were 2 British Columbia women, First Nations ladies, that were runners-up or honorable mentions. One is Jess Housty from the Haitsauk First Nation of Bella Bella. And you can see from the picture, she is a loving mother. She's deeply immersed in her culture. She is one of the strongest community, grassroots, amazing leaders that we have in British Columbia. She has started so many different things in the community, has stood up for the environment, has started libraries for the youth. She's worked with community to develop gardens to a way to address food security in a very remote place. And she is well sought out in the scholastic world because of her education and experience. And it was such a joy to see Jess being one of the names that were considered for this award. The other lady that was also an honorable mention was Jennifer Wachus. And I know her as Jen. She is an amazing force in a very isolated community in Rivers Inlet. The nation is a Wikinu Nation. And she has been involved in meeting the needs of the community, of the strong focus on the youth. She's worked with a number of different organizations to get facilities built in a very, very isolated community. But that's not where her passion ends. She realized that there were things that are occurring in British Columbia that were just inconsistent with her nation's views. And I'm talking about the grizzly bear trophy hunt. And through her path forward in engaging a broad range of people around the coast of British Columbia, she was instrumental in organizing the ban of commercial grizzly bear trophy hunting and helped raise the money to buy out the tenures across the coast. She's an amazing person that has a deep in her heart for leadership long before she became a member of the elected council. And she's always been a very big inspiration for me, meeting the needs of the children, of the youth, and ensuring that the community is able to move forward in a good way to ensure that there's a strong batch of strong young people that have an opportunity to escape the legacy of the residential school, to pursue dreams and visions for their nation unencumbered by the trauma. And I know that that has been a huge bit of both of these honorable mention vision for their community. So I'll stop there. I could go on all day about these two, but I'm so happy with what we have, who we selected by consensus for this wonderful award. So thank you very much.
It's wonderful to be able to celebrate the contributions and the spirit and the work and inspiration drawn from our honorable mentions today. And as both Olivia and Bob have mentioned, our recipient was selected by a selection panel of judges. And there's an old saying that says something like, always keep company in whose presence you're humble. And I think that's very true with the representative of our selection panel today, Sarah Cunningham. Sarah, please come up and
Miigwech Mike, Miigwech Bob. Gahandi Kwesh Shwabik Condition Paz Makwa Dodan Ramadoj Shabbat. This year's recipient truly reflects leadership and our 4-generation principle. She graduated from the midwifery education program at the Toronto Metropolitan University in 2007. She worked tirelessly at the Native Child and Family Services, developing policies and programs focused on keeping mothers, parents, and their children together. She co-founded the 7th generation midwives in Toronto in 2006. While she was co-founding as well, she was the Indigenous Health Lead at the Ministry of Health, Toronto Central LINZ, while she co-developed the Toronto Indigenous Health Strategy. Since 2014, she has led work at the Association of the Ontario Midwives to reclaim, restore, and decolonize Indigenous midwifery. She has helped birth joy into our families and communities while protecting and honoring our future generations. Today, we honor and give a huge Shinigwech thank you, Yako, to her ancestors, all her relations, and to Oneida Nation. We honor her, our first Jack Layton Indigenous Leadership Award to the Director of Indigenous Midwifery of AOM, Ellen Blais.
Sorry, folks, there's no sound. Can we please restart with the volume?
Also use the word, if you're a family living in, say, downtown Toronto, and your granddaughter, your daughter's gonna have a baby, the expectation is that you're gonna be able to be there, or know where she's going to a local hospital. But can you imagine, just for a moment, that the standard is that actually you're not allowed, you can't be there. She gets in the plane out of Toronto and she flies up to Attawaukuskat, for example, to give birth. People like, what is wrong with that system? And that's what's happened to Indigenous people. So my name is Ellen Blais. I also use the word Kanikajija, which is my spirit name, Little Flower, and I work at the Association of Ontario Midwives. And as a director of Indigenous midwifery here, to go back to Indigenous communities, time before time, there were midwives. So in the community, Indigenous midwives, they still take excellent clinical care of the prenatal period, the birth, and the postpartum. But back in the day, childbirth became medicalized, and it was taken, the midwifery care was taken away from us, and it was brought into the position, scope of practice, and they really kind of sidelined midwives. And we're reclaiming that important role in Indigenous communities now. Our team leads the policy and government work at the association, and we aim our work at the growth of Indigenous midwifery in Indigenous communities. So we started out with 3 or 4 Indigenous midwifery practices, and we now have over 10 in Ontario. The story of Indigenous families through the process of colonization has been a lot about separation. So I was taken from my birth mother, Molly Day, who was from Oneida Nation of the Thames, and I was taken from her and placed in a non-Indigenous home purposefully. I developed the idea of wanting to be a midwife so that I could stand at the bedside, so that I could be there and advocate and support and so that the intervention of child welfare and this forced removal of children needed to stop. So I thought I'll do my little thing to figure out how we can make things more like just improved for Indigenous women, so that wasn't something, so they could have agency for themselves to make those decisions. Of course, it's an incredible honor to be the first recipient of this award, and accepting the award. Where I turn my thoughts is to all of the Indigenous, the Aboriginal, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the First Nations, Cree, Métis, and Inuit midwives out there, and the birth workers that are doing this work. It makes sense to me that this award starts with birth, because this is a place you're birthing the creation of the award, and the birth of the babies in the community are going to lead to healthier outcomes. So I really Appreciate that very much. And I want to thank the Jack Layton legacy. Jack Layton was one of my favorite leaders of this country back in the day. He's an incredible leader himself, that he's inspiring words that love, hope, and optimism can change the world. And I totally resonate, that really resonates with me. And we can be optimistic when we have midwives in the community, because we're changing the world one birth at a time.
Chimigwach. It is with my great honor to invite Ellen Blais up to present her with the Jack Layton Indigenous Leadership Award. Welcome. Olivia. Chimigwach. I invite Ellen to say a few words, to share some of her wisdom and knowledge with us. Thank you. Just get the mic a little closer. Thank you so much. It's an incredible honor to be here today and to hear the words of the community, all the leadership. I know Ms. Olivia Chow, and thank you so much to all the committees for this decision that you made to honor Indigenous midwives and the work that we do. So I'm going to start, we've got a 20-minute speech, so just so you know, you need to just think about the time that you need to be here, and that it starts with a poem by the first poet laureate in Ontario. His name is Randall Adjei, and it's called Flowers. One of the only things more difficult than death itself is to be forgotten. Or perhaps plant legacies and never see your roses blossom, to never unbox your gifts before your coffin. We all deserve to be honored while we are still alive, to witness the budding gratitude of loved ones with open eyes. You deserve to be celebrated like you were already gone, to be given your flowers while they are still flourishing. While you can still smell the sweet scent of photosynthesis branching out of the purpose you are rooted into and the fruits you've produced. So may I give you flowers while they are still in bloom. A bouquet package delivered and handed to you in honor of the effervescent existence of your truth. May this be a reminder that your words and your actions live on beyond being 6 feet and entombed. You are worthy of being handed yours while you are still alive. Well, you can still sniff the sweet fragrance blossom in time. A reminder of how you bloomed before you were called to tune from darkness to light. How you passed on the baton for the next generation to take flight. A relay race of time between the lines of from and to, the legacy of how you actualized into truth. You have the right to leave this earth, knowing that your presence was appreciated, that it made a difference, that it meant something to someone while there was still air in your lungs. What would it look like to normalize honoring those who mean something to us before they transition, so that they never question our love while they are still living? It's easy to take our loved ones for granted when we are caught up in our day-to-days, but in the same breath, the next breath is never guaranteed to stay. Deep grounding breath here. So before the leaves fall off their trees and they branch out and reach into the heavens, let them know they are a blessing, that their mere existence was a gift. May death never be the reason you appreciate the fact they lived.
So dear Ms. Chow and honored guests and those that are joining in online, first of all, I want to thank you for being here and for the honor of accepting the Jack Layton Legacy Indigenous Leadership Award. It is so relevant that I am the inaugural recipient as you are birthing this award with a midwife. We all deserve to be celebrated while we are still here, alive and kicking, and I say thank you from my heart, Ellen Blais. You may think that starting with a poem about flowers and life and death doesn't really connect to the theme today of Indigenous midwives. For me, the essence of midwifery is very much focused on the doorways from which we come from and the ways in which we go out into whatever is beyond life. That life and death are the profound elements in community that Indigenous midwives took care of. Midwives regard life, and more specifically, the beginning of life, to be the most sacred moments in time. The connection to flowers continues with my name. It is fitting that this day is within the height of spring, where the flowers and trees are in full blossom. The moon is in her waxing to full, and I can feel the pull of her power. The name that was put through the longhouse of my nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, was given to me by Ray John, an Indigenous healer and leader. I will share it with you today. My spirit name, I am Kanikajija, Little Flower. I was born through the waters of my birth mother, Gajika Lolox, many flowers, and her mother was Gaji Jahome, she who carries or holds flowers. Both my mother and grandmother attended St. Anne's Residential School. However, I never got to meet my birth mother. I mention my birth mother and grandmother because as midwives, we understand the value, the profound connection of our relationship with generations past, present, and future. We understand that as daughters, we have existed prior to our birth as a fetus growing in the intrauterine environment of our mothers. Our mothers. With that, we exist in the same place as where our grandmothers did. While our mothers were growing the eggs that are us, she existed in the uterus of her mother, our grandmother. These connections that tie us to past, present, and future generations is the physical and spiritual umbilical cord that carries the intelligence of the cellular memory of generations through our bodies. These are the lands from which we come. This is our connection to the land and to where we go when we leave. This is the landscape of our bodies, women as water carriers. And this is our connection to the lands and to the waters, and ultimately in death to the sky world. Since time before time, Indigenous communities had midwives. They were the aunties, the mothers, and the grandmothers who passed along excellent clinical and ceremonial knowledge for transfer to future midwives in community. This reproductive knowledge was integral to the health of Indigenous nations and communities. Within my story is embedded the interruption of that knowledge sharing between generations. My story goes back a long way to the colonization of Indigenous lands and communities. As Inuit lawyer Sandra Inuktik states, quote, colonization is a cunning beast. Midwifery is actively decolonizing reproductive health care at the front lines of community health and reclaiming our central role as community leaders. Yay. Finally. The theme of my history and that of many Indigenous people is woven with breaking down of relationships with the land and with our families. It is about separation and loss. It began with the separation of land from community and forcing us to live on land that wasn't our home. It continued with the forced removal of Indigenous children and infants from their homes and families to live in residential schools where they suffered immeasurable trauma. It continues through the child welfare system, which is very much present in the lives of many Indigenous people today, with the forced removal of infants from their parents' and mothers' care. In Manitoba, almost 90% of the children in care are Indigenous, in care of the state. Yet, in relation to that data, Indigenous people make up about 3 to 5% of the population. Added to that already heavy list is the racism that Indigenous people experience while accessing healthcare and the forced and coerced sterilization of Indigenous women today. For me, the separation began when I was apprehended at birth and separated from my birth mother and placed in a non-Indigenous home. The policies of assimilation were policies of cultural genocide that caused individual harms. And for me, these harms are too personal to name. It has taken me years to bring to consciousness that while my identity was being taken away from me, there were others, child welfare workers, lawyers, and others who knew who I was, who knew who I belonged to, where I was from. To this day, the systemic oppression continues. I am still not able to access identifying information in my files or even have in possession of a long-form birth certificate. I do not know who my birth father is. He remains unknown. Midwives recognize birth as a normal physiological process. Midwives protect that space for women to have the kind of birth they choose. Birth is not a sickness, and it is not a disease. Midwives provide choice of birthplace at home, in the hospital, or birth centers, and midwives are part of the healthcare teams in hospitals, community health centers, and midwifery-led practices. Going back in time, as babies and children were forcibly removed from communities to attend residential schools, and for those of you here, the last residential school in Canada closed in 1996. The parents who were left behind were reeling in the loss of their children. Childbirth gradually became medicalized, and the role of community midwives was displaced. Then started the policies of separation and removal, the evacuation of women from their communities from the north to be flown thousands of kilometers to the south, which continues today. In many Indigenous communities across our country, birth is a ceremony that has not been seen for generations. And just like I said in the video, I want you to imagine if you're in downtown Toronto and your grandmother or your granddaughter or daughter is going to have a baby and it's a celebration and you just assume they're going to go to the nearest hospital and you'll be able to be there maybe for the birth and celebrate afterwards. That's not the way it is for Indigenous communities. So I'd want you to think about how would you feel if they got on a plane at the Toronto Island Airport, for example, the Billy Bishop Airport, got on a plane and had to fly thousands of kilometers away, about 36 weeks of pregnancy, so about 4 weeks before their due dates. And then they'd stay about a week beyond, all alone, with nobody from their family and no one to celebrate that with them. And that's exactly what's happening in our communities. Not a lot of people know that. While learning about my history and reflecting on my own experience, I felt there was a need for change, for the restoration of Indigenous midwives here in Toronto. While attending the university to learn midwifery skills, several of us formed a group of students and midwives. We worked on submitting a successful proposal to the Ministry of Health. We called the practice 7th Generation Midwives of Toronto to serve the community, which continues to be a thriving practice today. In continuing my story, something led me to apply for a position as a midwife in an Indigenous child welfare agency to work with the mothers and infants who they deemed high risk. At that time, I had no idea what the work was. I started working with the most amazing Indigenous women who were pregnant and involved in the child welfare system and who carried lifetimes of trauma. It didn't take me long to realize what was happening. When I got there, when I talked to the workers, they said, well, there's no one to apprehend. And so what happened was they would take the files of the women that were called in and they put them away in their drawers And they just went to the hospital and they apprehended the babies at birth. That's exactly what was happening. Well, it didn't take me long to realize we needed to make change there too. That was not okay. And so I set about, in my mind, to change what was happening at that agency. We formed a team and worked on prevention instead of apprehension. We created a circle of care that specifically only included trauma-informed workers, such as social workers, lawyers, midwives and physicians, addictions and mental health workers, public health nurses, family court workers, and shelter, housing, and support. It took me about 3 years to realize, you've got to imagine, you know, as an adoptee, you kind of dissociate from your own situation. I see a lot of people nodding their heads and understanding that. So it took me about 3 years to realize that every one of the women I worked with was my birth mother, and every baby was me. I'm incredibly grateful to the women who shared that part of their lives with me. After working with over 500 mom and baby dyads, although we did not keep super accurate data, we certainly anecdotally intervened in many babies being apprehended and supported families to stay together. My journey continues. I realized that we needed to make systemic change to bring birth home and provide that supportive birth environment with the woman and her family as a center of care. I asked myself, what can I do to support midwives at the systemic level? Why are Indigenous midwives so important? Why do I continue to be inspired and passionate about the work that I do? It is because of a few simple concepts. These concepts are ones that resonate with who I am, my identity, and where I can feel at home. It is because as midwives, we are the community. Midwives are part of the identity of the communities that claim us and that include us in a powerful space of belonging. We do not go to work, then come home. Our office is the land we live on. Our office is where the babies are born. We are decolonizing office space. We are not working remotely. Midwives always did. It is because as midwives, we understand a fundamental principle. The environment is not outside of us. It's not a resource that we extract and throw away. It is not out there somewhere. It is both internal and external at the same time. As my midwife mentor, Gudji Cook from Akwesasne states, women are the first environment. We are privileged to be the doorway to life. At the breast of women, the generations are nourished and sustained. From the bodies of women flow the relationship of those generations, both to society and to the natural world. In this way, the earth is our mother, the old people said. In this way, we as women are the earth. When we intervene in the practice of apprehending babies, we create healthier families and intervene in the pathways that lead directly to foster care, trauma, and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. I encourage you to read the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls final report and their calls to justice. From the report, and I quote, ensuring the health and well-being of Indigenous mothers and their newborns is an important part of rebuilding Indigenous families and community in ways that also lessen the potential for further violence and harm. How can we rebuild a feeling of love, peace, joy, and security and belonging if our infants keep getting apprehended? This includes, as we heard, embracing practices that can generate health, well-being, and strength. This also includes, as the evidence demonstrates, supporting practices like community midwifery and the right to give birth at home and within the community to ensure that the bonds of safety that are created in that moment are cemented for life and therefore can ultimately contribute to safety later on. So at this point, I would like to shift this talk and take this opportunity to honor the midwives who are working with their hearts, spirits, and mind to improve health outcomes for Indigenous communities in unique and diverse models of care. We know of at least 45 to 55 Indigenous midwives working in Ontario And there are about 150 midwives working from across nations, from coast to coast to coast. However, we do not have enough midwives to fill the demand. Over the past 3 years, demand for Indigenous midwifery programs in Ontario has exceeded our expectations. And while we are working on increasing the capacity within communities to identify those that are interested in birth and then bring the training to them in various pathways. There are simply not enough funded positions in community at this time to realize this goal. As well, you must understand that when governments and decision makers talk about low-hanging fruit, they talk about deliverables. And this is an important point. As Indigenous people, these concepts do not resonate with us. Why? Why do they not? Well, we're using our energies in communities to undo over 150 years of colonization and oppression. So let's turn the tables and deliver what Indigenous people want and need in community. Let's bring Indigenous voices to decision-making tables across the country. Self-determination and Indigenous governance for you folks, and we need that. So at the Indigenous Midwifery Summit in Thunder Bay in 2019, Indigenous midwives, birth workers, and support people gathered together. They created this powerful list of the value of Indigenous midwifery. Indigenous midwifery is intergenerational, ceremonial, and relational. It supports self-determination. Indigenous midwifery is inclusive of all community members, and it acknowledges the power in parenting, motherhood, and includes cultural and specific teachings related to parenting and motherhood, and that midwifery spans the life cycle. I want to thank the team behind the scenes who work with me to bring birth home. I want to start with Kelly Stadelbauer. She is the Executive Director of the Association of Ontario Midwives, who supports all the work that we are doing. Without her support, we wouldn't be anywhere. I want to thank Juana Berenstein. She is the Director of Policy and Comms, who has been an incredible support since 2013. Our team is really very new, starting in 2017. If you are here in person, please stand up. I just want to thank my team, incredible group of women that are behind the scenes making this happen. Tammy Casganet, Carol Cucci, Lila Monique. Stand up, Lila. Ooh, you're here today. Karen Lawford, Becky Holden up in Treaty 3, Marla Monet, Jessica Danforth, Pauline Matthews, and Leah Bourguignon. I also want to thank Claudette Commanda, Bob Chamberlain, and Serena Kostachin, who are members of the selection committee. And most importantly, my family, my children, Derek, who is standing stone, Genevieve, you're here today, singing Hummingbird. Please stand up. And Sarah, standing woman who carries thunder. In closing, I want to talk about love, hope, and optimism. To honor the words of Jack Leighton, midwifery is the embodiment of Jack's legacy. With every birth, there is love for the new generation. There is hope that Indigenous communities will become healthier, and there is optimism that we will continue to graduate more midwives to bring birth home. Our vision is an Indigenous midwife in every Indigenous community. So I will end with, I've just got a 1-minute poem left here. I will end with these words from Black Elk. He's with Wachus, Dakota. He was born in 1963 and he passed away in 1950. But this poem has always resonated with me. You have noticed that everything an Indian does is in a circle. And that is because the power of the world always works in circles and everything tries to be round. In the old days, when we were a strong and happy people, all our power came to us from the sacred hoop of the nation. And so long as the hoop was unbroken, the people flourished. The flowering tree was a living center of the hoop, and the circle of the four quarters nourished it. The east gave peace and light, the south gave warmth, the west gave rain, and the north, with its cold and mighty wind, gave strength and endurance. This knowledge came to us from the outer world with our religion. Everything the power of the world does is done in a circle. The sky is round, and I have heard that the earth is round like a ball, and so are all the stars. The wind in its greatest power whirls. Birds make their nests in circles, for theirs is the same religion as ours. The sun comes forth and goes down again in a circle, and so does the moon, and both are round. Even the seasons form a great circle in their changing, and always come back again to where they were. The life of a person is a circle from childhood to childhood, and so is everything where power moves. Our teepees were round like the nests of birds, and these were always set in a circle, the nation's hoop, a nest of many nests, where the Great Spirit meant for us to hatch our children. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen, for those beautiful words. We are going to do a strong woman song. We're going to go 4 times through. We invite those that are online to stand facing the north direction. Those that are here, we can all stand. We also invite those that know this strong woman song to come and join us. Come on, ladies. Do this in a half move. So north, is it this way? Miigwech, and I do believe we ended in the West, and Bob, who is joining us from the West Coast, is going to honor us with one of their songs.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning from where I'm sitting. First, I want to thank and acknowledge the singers for such a beautiful song. I also want to thank Ellen for bringing home the importance of the work that her and her team are doing for all First Nations, Inuit and Métis people across Canada. We fight and we claw and we reach for what we once had. And we found through apologies from governments and so forth that the will to act is not as deep and as real as we need. And it's through efforts such as what Ellen is doing in bringing back a traditional way, which will lay a foundation for our future generations to come. And I'm very pleased and grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this effort today of meaningful change, working with First Nations and not simply saying, I'm sorry, and not act accordingly with an amends commensurate with the offense. But today is a day of celebration, and to know that the teachings that are being recognized today are going to reach into many communities, many nations, and many families. And for this, I'm very grateful as we rebuild our nations and continue on the strong path that the Creator has set down for all of our peoples. No better and no worse than any other, but simply a race of people that give respect and need respect given back. So I'll share a Yalakwala. In our culture of the Kwakwaka'wakw people, we sing a Yalakwala when things have gone well, when things have gone the way that they were intended. And the song speaks of taking the madness from our minds and sharing it out to our people. And I think that is quite appropriate for today. But before I do that, I want to thank all the members that made such an amazing selection. I want to thank Olivia for the incredible work she continues to do. All the MPs that are out there doing the work that's necessary. And of course, everyone that put their fingers to the keyboards and dialed the numbers and made all the arrangements for today to be such a success. It is through that effort that we will continue to move forward. So, Geakasa, and I'll sing the Yalakwala. Kila, aya, kila, ye tu slanugwa, na wala kwe, hai wo, hai wo. Hayale kila, hayale kila, ye du slanugwa, na wala kwe, hai wo, hai wo. Shachia kila, shachia kila, ye du slanugwa, na wala kwe, hai wo, hai wo. Shachia kila, shachia
Yechila, Yetus Lanugwa, Nawala Kwe, Hai Wo, Hai Wo. Gail Kessler. And thank you everyone for making time today. And let's take this happiness, let's take this celebration and put it into our hearts and share it with everyone we see as we go forward through the day and tomorrow too. And call your elders. They love you and they miss you. Thank you.
Marse Miigwech for everyone who's sharing here today. And I couldn't have put any better than Chief Chamberlain in terms of taking that hope, love, and optimism from Ellen's inspiration through to Jack Layton's legacy and keeping that with us these days more than ever to keep some company with like-minded folks. And we all hope you'll be able to stay for a few minutes, congratulate Ellen, spend some time in inspiration before leaving us today. And with that, I'm very honored to be able to draw our celebration and recognition here to a close. Thank you very much again, Marcel.